Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Josh White here with the NCBA Producer Education Team. Happy y'all could get on. We're excited tonight as we have a great panel lined up to discuss a lot of aspects of grazing management, sustainability, data collection, how that all fits with what you do each and every day, managing through drought conditions, a lot of you today, and also how we answer a lot of the questions around how we raise cattle that are being asked more and more here in this environment we're in 2022 and beyond. So thanks again. I think it's going to be really informative. Just as a reminder, for those of you that join these webinars frequently, you already know this, but your line's muted. We'll have hopefully around 100 folks on tonight. So unmuted microphones on participants leads to a lot of chaos. So you'll be muted tonight, but hopefully you can see that toolbar, or if you have a blue flower shaped icon at the bottom of your screen, you might be able to click on that and get a toolbar that gives you a question function. Feel free to type in questions as we go along tonight. We will do some Q&A at the end of the webinar. And tonight's a little bit different. We're going to be sharing screens and having a lot of discussion among the panelists. And we will have some slide sharing, but a little bit different format on tonight's webinar. So hopefully you enjoy it, find it informative, learn something, and also can get some of your questions answered. And with that, I'm going to work on introducing folks, and I'll go ahead and share my screen since that's what we're talking about here. So first up, I'm going to introduce John Farger with AgriWebb. John was raised on his family's 400,000 acre cattle station down in Australia. Had sheep as well down there, and that's where the love of agriculture, innovation, entrepreneurship really caught fire with John, and he co-founded AgriWebb in 2013, coming up on the 10th anniversary here pretty soon with Justin Webb and Kevin Baum. And we've done some of these webinars before with various speakers that AgriWebb sponsored and always learned something. These guys are on the front lines of working with ranchers and understanding how to collect data that makes a difference for them back on their operations. So John, appreciate y'all pulling this together, helping brainstorm this great session. We've also got Jimmy Chapman, who's founder and president of Ranch Sense, joining us tonight. He's had a variety of experiences with different industries, from ranching here in the U.S., Texas, Australia, around the world. He's an A&M graduate and worked in oil and gas, learned a lot through those experiences, has worked in technology with some other applications, and innovative guy that's learned a lot from other industries that he's working to bring to farmers and ranchers through Ranch Sense, and looking forward to hearing more about that. Jimmy, thank you for joining us tonight. And then Matthew Jones, who is with Regrow. He's the remote sensing scientist, senior remote sensing scientist there, and he's has a PhD in systems ecology from University of Montana, and well-renowned grazing management and range management consultant that's got over 25 published peer-reviewed rangeland monitoring publications. So a true expert in how we monitor the range and improve what we're doing every day. So thanks again, Matthew, for joining us with Regrow. And with that, if you guys want to all pull up your cameras and unmute yourselves as you answer these questions. We're going to start off talking a little bit about the situation we're in around the country. You know, it's pretty tough with the drought. Some parts of the country, multi-year drought now, getting into that D4, D5 category that makes people to make some really tough decisions on keeping breeding stock or not. I know we've done a number of webinars over the past 3 or 4 years with folks from Noble and some of our past Environmental Stewardship Award winners, thinking through how we manage through this. Maybe talk a little bit about your perspective on how you're helping customers, why this technology that each of you is bringing to the table can help folks plan for and manage through drought. I don't know who wants to start.
I'll jump out there. One of the things that we notice a lot with our customers is whether you're in a drought or whether you're not in a drought, water is always important. Cattle got to have water, but it's becoming more important during the drought, obviously, because you don't have any supplemental water out there, or very little supplemental water outside of the water that you're producing for your animals. So, but it also, from a monitoring standpoint, in our current environment with the economy, it puts ranchers in a bit of a bind as to, do they spend the money in the traditional way, buying diesel for pickups, paying people to go out and drive and look at water, or do they spend the money on a monitoring system? So the drought has caused an interesting situation for those looking to adopt certain technologies.
Yeah, and I can jump in and support that, and just going to talk a bit about the water monitoring myself from going through many droughts from a family ranching perspective. But I think the more tools, insights, data we have at our disposal is really going to set us up for success as an industry. I guess not only planning into a drought, but planning out of a drought. Right, so it's setting ourselves up for the next drought that's coming along, and then making sure we're well equipped to bounce back on that. So really, it's around having data and insights at our disposal to be making decisions on the way in, not really knowing when a drought's going to break, and the sorts of things that we're talking about is, even at the basic level, how many animals do we have, of what management group, and which ones are high performers and low performers, and making sure we're making those keep cull decisions early and putting resources into the animals that are going to give us the best outcome on the way out of the drought as well. And then I guess on the land side, it's really managing what resources we have available, and then optimizing, I guess the use of that, which we can talk a little bit about in more detail. And I think, the kind of some of the solutions we're going to be talking about today are really a great cross section of sort of a hardware software combination that can really set ourselves up for that working into a drought and working out of a drought.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and I'm seeing the great lineup that you guys have sort of put together here, in the sense that, like, I see, I see Jimmy's sense of like those specific monitors and those specific places on your ranch, and John, you're bringing a big ranch perspective. And then I'm going to zoom out even more, because my perspective is always sort of this remote sensing satellite view perspective. And it's sort of great to hear your take on this initially, in that sort of now, like, one of the big tools that we can bring now is this wealth of satellite imagery that now has gone back 20, 30 years. And we've just hit a point where we can process it, we can look at it, we can analyze it in ways that we can bring like actionable data to people, rather than just say cool imagery to look at, right? We can actually bring pieces of information that people can act on. And so when it comes to me thinking about drought, it becomes a bit of his perspective and historical perspective. Like you were saying, we're sort of entering into possibly this multi-year drought. Well, what happened the last time we had a multi-year drought? What did your operation look like? Which pastures were actually making it through, and which ones were just trouble, right? Ideally, you have notes for that, right? But of course, that's always difficult. Keeping those notes specific, having those numbers at hand are difficult. And so we can leverage this historical look and say, oh yeah, I knew that back in 2002, this happened on my ranch, and this part was okay and this wasn't. So now what should I do now that I might be entering that situation again? So yeah, that historical perspective and leveraging all that data is kind of how I start to look at this problem as it emerges more and more.
Yeah, that's land monitoring. That leads right into some thoughts on that. You know, if it's only been a few years ago that some of these concepts were really introduced to the ranching community, Matt, to your point, having some historical data, even if it's at maybe not as quite a specific level, should be really valuable. And what about on the genetics front? I know there, like I mentioned in the intro, a lot of folks are making some really tough decisions. And you know, how from your perspective should producers be looking at that keep cull decision? And it's a big investment with the input costs today to keep animals if you don't have a readily available feed source, you know, standing for those that are dealing with drought. So how, you know, some of the data that you guys are helping ranchers collect feed into that decision making, and or, you know, any thoughts that you've had just from your role observing and consulting in the past?
Yeah, I can jump in and kick this one off, and actually, you know, point that Matt just made there, which is really around going back and having a look at historical data sets, and that's probably the first point to all of this, which is, you know, let's actually digitize records and digitize this data, right? Because going back and flipping back through, you know, 30 years of diaries like my dad would have to do, right, and get through those diaries to find that information is near impossible if available at all. And then it's very difficult to get those data sets with this really powerful satellite imaging that Matt is talking about to actually then be able to make an actionable decision. That's just not accessible to producers right now. So if we can digitize, we can have that data. We're not only making real-time decisions, but we're able to look back in history and say, right, we can now have a really good understanding of what did happen historically and what could potentially happen in the future. So I guess that's the first point to think about on this. And then to directly address the genetics piece, I mean, you know, we know that there's a lot of factors that go into ranching businesses, right? And not only that, each ranch is different to each other, depending on region, depending on style of operation. So, you know, when we look at genetics specifically, we would need to look at, well, what's the goals and style of that operation, right? Are we a cow-calf operation that's really focusing on fertility and breed, or are we really focusing on more of an optimizing for weight gain in a stocker trading type operation? And both of them have their merits, but you know, in the first instance, we really need to go, right, well, these are the goals of the business, and this is what's kind of going to get me through from a medium to long-term perspective. And now how do we actually make those kind of genetic decisions? Genetic decisions can be longer-term plays as well, but in the first instance, we see so many times, time and time again, that people aren't managing their herds and their animals to a specific level or an individual level to work out what are the high performers and low performers, right? We spend all our blood, sweat, and tears into treating animals the same, and they're not the same, right? We have high performers and low performers. So we can really quickly make some of those decisions just based off a couple of years of historical record, or even a couple of months, right? How are they putting on weight, right? How are they performing from a fertility perspective from the last year? So we're not even talking about decades of data we need to look at. We can make really kind of powerful decisions in the short term. And that's why we would strongly advocate for, you know, exploring managing animals at an individual level so that we can actually remove the underperformance, right? Remove them out of the herd, and actually we can see, you know, a massive increase in profitability and a cost reduction. So I think that when we talk about genetic selection, let's make sure we talk about, are we measuring that, right? And do we have the ability to work out which animals are performing, which ones are not? And the amount of times I go to bull sales and see $10, $20, $50, $60,000 head for buying the prize bull, but then we never track if it performs or not, right? You know, we say it looks pretty good and it should perform well, but is it actually delivering in my mama cow herd? So that's where data is so critical to be able to help make those decisions. And we can make those decisions quickly. We don't need years and decades of information for that.
Matt, back to you, I guess, maybe a little more on that, the trend level data. You know, how many years of data do you need to put together to really start thinking about range management implications the decision-making implications that you're having, and understand how to make the change you want to see on an operation. How do you go into that, and how can a producer think about that?
Yeah, I would think about it. It's very situational, right? Very specific to the operation and the geography that you're located in. There's sort of these bigger, longer term concerns of the monitoring, say like woody encroachment, right? In the Great Plains, in the Southern Great Plains in particular, it's this super slow moving process that you don't even necessarily see until it's choked out half of your forage. So that's one of those ones that in those situations, you got to start taking that big historical perspective, really think about what the ranch looked like 10 years prior. And those are the type of things too that we've learned now that you really need to get them right at the beginning. Like you need to, whether it's burns or whether it's cuts or whatever it might be, get that management practice in place so that you aren't faced with some massive problem in the long haul. So there's those very slow moving ones. And then there's ones that are sort of much quicker in terms of, do you have a planting that you can come in and do? Are there some nitrogen fixers you can mix in there that are going to help that land? And you might see those effects within just a few years. Whether you see those at grand scales or not, that's always, depends on soils, depends on the water conditions you have those years. But that's one of those ones that's a bit quicker. That's one that we advocate for, and the idea of look at the diversity of the plants in your pastures. Those are changes you can make pretty quickly. I mean, mind you, yeah, they're not cheap and it's not easy to do, but they're ones that would get you a quicker turnaround and give you greater resilience if you have a mix of species, say, in that pasture versus just one or two. So those are a couple ones that of a slow moving and a quicker moving. One of the big threats that I can't really put down is cheatgrass, right? And its effect across the Great Basin, Idaho, Nevada, and it's creeping in other states massively as well. And that's just one of those ones where it really, like a fire can kick it off and really change the landscape really quickly. And so considering what you might do for breaks, keeping a close eye on those annuals as they start spreading in to the landscape is a really key one. There's not that many mitigation measures we have, but there are options out there for that. And so that's a really key one I would think of. Those are the ones that really pop in my head. Two would be the negative ones, but one's at least a positive one of seeing if you can get a mix of species on there to help the land surface and the soils in particular.
Jimmy, when I think about grazing, especially in some environments, cows are lazy. I'm just going to tell you, and where the water is where they're going to stick close to. So, and of course, Matt, all of you may want to chime in on this, but since Jimmy's technology is really tied to water development and understanding a lot of that water usage and quality and such, what advice do you have? I guess I think about I'm originally from Georgia, where there's plenty of water, but when third and fourth generation sort of took over the operation there, we had a very underutilized pastures, that were further from our water source. So we made some changes to help utilize those, more effectively and be able to, and that's in an area where you have plenty of water in these, in these areas where you're talking about 10 to 20 inches of rain a year, that becomes even more important, the water development piece. So maybe just shed some light on your thoughts on that and how producers can think about that, maybe even in this context of drought that we're going through.
Sure. So the overwhelming majority of the customer base that we have right now is in the American West. So not specific to the area that you were talking about growing up in, but yeah, so making sure that you have dispersed water across your pasture is really key right now, because some of the bigger ranches that we work on out in Arizona that have 40 50,000 acre pastures, they'll have multiple water sources in every pasture. And like you said, that those cows are lazy, and they'll use cowboys to push those cows across the pasture. But if you push them somewhere and you haven't checked ahead of time and know that there's water there, the second you ride off, they're going to turn around and go right back to where the water is, because, you know, grass is important, but lack of water kills. So, you know, it's what we provide, specifically those operations, is the peace of mind of knowing when you put your plan in place, you're going to be ready. You're whether it's moving cattle across a pasture or moving cattle from pasture to pasture, you know ahead of time that you have water there, and then once they're there, you obviously can keep your tabs on it as well. You know what Matt and John are talking about as far as keeping records and things like. There's a lot more complexity. Not diminishing what we do at all. There's a lot more complexity to what they do. And really using data to look at trends and things like that. Ours is more operational, like purely operational. I know that there are operational aspects to what they're talking about as well, but we provide, you know, just like daily operational planning for what are we going to do today? Do we have water today? So there's a little bit of a difference, but yeah, still there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there, Jimmy. And you know, it's literally like you wake up in the morning and you've run out of water, right? You need to move those animals, because in the middle of the summer, like, they'll die. You don't have many hours up your sleeves, right? And I think coupled with those sort of immediate insights, together with the insights that you can get by opening up, you know, your ranch map on AgRev to say, right, we're out of water here. We're going to have to move them to another pasture. How much pasture have we got in the neighboring blocks, right? And then you can then make those immediate decisions to be, okay, we have capacity over here, and then that's when you go out and make that call to move them from pasture A to pasture B, because yep, you've got grass and you've got water. So, you know, the coupling of those makes those decisions really driven by data, right? Rather than, okay, well, let's just move them across to the paddock, the pasture next door, because that's what we've always done. You might drop them in there, and actually there's not enough feed to kind of be sustainable in that pasture. So it's a great combination of using tools at your disposal.
Sure, and you know, one step further on that, we're actually in the final stages of completing our integration from RanchSense into AgriWeb. So that data very soon will be, you know, if we have common customers, they'll be able to push that data directly into AgriWeb and see current water conditions on the AgriWeb maps. So just another tool.
Just for me, Jimmy. I mean, I've just teeing it up.
That was on my last slide too. So
we'll have to cover back over it again. You can remind us later. So Matt, along these same lines, the technology you were talking about earlier, will that help a rancher define some of those underutilized areas where they may want to consider developing water resources, or especially again in time of a drought, if there's an area of the ranch that has not been grazed very heavily for a long time, is that an area where you might consider trying to move some cattle, especially if you're already hauling water and you can get it there?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. That's kind of just what I was going to say, is that the integration really becomes powerful in that scale, right? Where you have everything set up, and just like you're saying, you see, because you can see the entire ranch, the entire operation, regardless of how big, right? Because we have literally global coverage, that you can look at that specific pasture, and yeah, you might have never moved in there at this time of year because they were always way too far away, and you were like, that's not going to be worth it. I don't want to try to even think about it. But if you don't have much choice in these drought conditions, and that pasture is the only place that they have enough feed, and you got one of Jimmy's sensors to let you know you actually have water there, well, then you can move with confidence and know that you're not going to waste a day or two and move them, and then, you know, have some horrible effects like you have no water, or you have to move them back, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's really the integration of these things of being able to see the specifics, like what Jimmy brings you, and the details of what John brings you, and then being able to look at the entire operation as a whole that day and know what's happening is huge. And it's funny, you know, I say to ranchers, I'm obviously someone with more of a scientific background, The days I've spent on a ranch are numbered, and I don't pretend to know. And I know that ranchers, for the most part, generally say, well, I know what's happening, right? I've been on this land for 25 years or 50 years, whatever it might be. I know what's happening. And you do, but there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of variability. It's just hard to keep in your brain year after year, right? I mean, I have trouble with it. I know everybody does. So it's really being able to get that full picture and have it all right there in front of you is just so powerful. Right?
Well, I know for me, the more years that go by, the more I get the years confused as well. Like, wait, didn't that happen last year? No, it was 3 years ago. And, time just keeps going faster and faster. Well, this might be a great time to kind of transition to a little more specifics on the tools and tech. And I know you each put together a couple of slides here. Any other comments we want to go into? Anybody have any other thoughts on this line of discussion we've had before I kick it over to John to let him share a few slides from AgriWeb?
I think happy to do it. All these topics are going to be very relevant. So,
all right. Well, let me see if I can hit all the right buttons, and we'll get you displaying. And I'm going to minimize my camera so we can see more of the screen
here. Okay. I assume we can all see that, Josh. If you could just say.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, we've covered a bit of ground here, and Josh on that introduction. But John Farger here, co-founder of AgriWeb, and I wanted to start off with, we are a livestock business management focused software solution, really on the ranching industry, on the livestock industry, and for me, it all started. I put this picture up here because this topic is directly aligned with what I grew up in. I grew up in almost the middle of Australia on about 400,000 acres. 7.5 inches of rainfall, and we'd be lucky to get that, right? So here's a photo of pretty dry times. So very used to drought conditions. Very used to kind of planning for that, making decisions based off that, and how we can kind of get in early and come out the other end. Being a sustainable business. And I think from a water monitoring perspective, it's we would have to spend 2 days driving around, literally just checking waters, right? And we'd have to do that 2 or 3 times a week, just to make sure we had water for the livestock. So being able to do this remotely is a huge cost saving, and the time you get back to be able to then move that business forward is instrumental. So I'm really excited that these solutions like RanchSense are now available for producers. It's absolutely, moving the industry forward in a huge way. And the other one, is obviously around data. And this is my experience growing up. There was not, readily available software on the market to help make better decisions. So I wanted to do something about that. And ultimately, this is a crux of what we do here at AgriWeb, right? 95% of producers are still running their business off pencil and paper, that paddock notebook. We've all seen that before. It sits in the top pocket. It ends up in the water trough, and then all that data is gone. Or if we want to get access to it, we've got to go back in time, and then we can't compare it with other data sets to really move our business forward. So here at AgriWeb, we have a holistic management platform. We cover everything across that ranching business, from all of your animal records and data to pasture records. We're not only beef ranchers or beef farmers, we're grass farmers, so it's all got to come in together and really make that one holistic decision-making tool. Critically, it's visual, it's easy to use. It is built the way farmers and ranchers think about their business, which is based around that ranch map. Touch screen drag and drop technology, so you can actually stand out in the pasture. It works offline, and you can perform those records, and you can actually see what's happening and make those decisions, some of which of what we've already spoken about. We see our clients that can increase productivity 9-10% in a year by making those decisions we just spoke about before around keeping and culling, optimizing grazing and pasture management, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail as well. We support customers in about 16 geographies, big focus here in the US, about 19 million animals on the platform, and we support about 15,000 producers. that have made the decision to ultimately move from pencil and paper into a digital solution and move their business forward. So that's at a high level. Now I really want to dig into, well, what does AgriWebb do for drought mitigation? And really, when we look at land and property management, it's around maximizing that pasture utilization. So this is really around understanding, how much forage we have available, the stocking rate across each pasture, helping us make decisions of, if I'm going to make a stock movement, how many days do I have available in that next pasture for my animals to graze on? All the rancher has to do is literally open up the app. We derive these insights, and they make that movement, right? And we calculate all that in the back end. We also have a base, so that we're not eating below that. We're not getting so far down that the land on that pasture is degraded. So really looking at sustainable decision making. The other point here is really around water point management. We've spoken about, managing those water points, but through this mapping software, we can actually really look at how big our pastures are and how far those animals, we talked about lazy cows, how far they actually have to walk to get to that water. Now, on average, we know that cows are not really walking more than 3 to 4 miles from that watering point. Now, if we have massive paddocks and pastures, we could have massive areas of underutilized pastures. So that's when we get into decisions around, fencing management and the size of those pastures, and really looking at how we can optimize rotational grazing to really make the use of that water management and that land management. And the other exciting thing here is this is where integrations with Regrow will allow for this to come in directly at that paddock level. What we're talking about here is, forage level insights at that pasture level. So the rancher can know how much forage is available directly through that remote sensing, directly through that satellite technology, to help make decisions about how many days left in that pasture before we need to move it. The next section is livestock management. So this is really, again, identifying the over and under performers and making decisions off that. This graph here, you can see we're tracking live weight and live weight over time. So we can work out and filter really easily what's performing, whether it's vendors of where we're getting those animals from, whether it's genetic selection, or whether it be sire dam performance. So it's really easy now to actually work out which animals are performing and which ones are not, and make those really quick decisions. And the other critical thing here is, we haven't spoken much tonight about, is really around feed, right? Supplemental feed is a huge cost. When we're running through drought, the amount of times I've spoken to ranchers who do not have a good handle on how much they're spending in the consumption, and then really, when they should be making those decisions around selling before the investment is just too large at a supplemental feed cost. So these are all the things that you can track in AgriWebb and then make really those powerful data-driven decisions. Final bit is the ecosystem, which is the exciting piece that all of us are on tonight about, is when we integrate these solutions, what does that look like, right? So here at AgriWebb, we have a number of partners and a number of integrations, whether that be through the animal tracking or whether it be through what we're talking about tonight around these pasture management and also on the ranch management side. So, RanchSense is that example where you've got that hardware, those insights are coming directly into AgriWebb. So now you can see in real time what the water levels are. You've got one spot to go and look at those insights. You've then got your holistic platform around your pasture availability, and you have all the power, at your fingertips to make that decision and go about your business. So look, super quick overview, but really it's a case of driving integration, collaboration with best-in-class groups out there that can really move our industry forward and make a difference, not only in drought, but in terms of livestock productivity and moving our business forward.
Excellent. And I think we're handing to Matt next to talk about his platform, Regrow. Matt, are you able to grab those controls?
Yeah. Is everybody seeing my screen now?
Yep. Looking good.
All right. Great. Oops. All right, so I'll do, again, a super quick overview of regrow, and then we'll sort of dive into a specific example. The mission here at regrow essentially is to make regenerative agriculture ubiquitous on every acre globally. And we have a whole suite of partnerships across the agriculture industry, ecosystem standards and registries, because we operate in the carbon space as well. And we have loads of people using our services to try to reach this goal to combat climate change and grow profitability across all operations. We're having an impact as it is. We monitor nearly 400 million acres right now annually. The project's powered by regrow, have sequestered over 80,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're in 45 countries and bring 15 years of data at minimum on every field. And that's really the power of that satellite imagery. So some of the key regenerative agricultural principles for grazing lands that we adopt here at regrow, essentially, first and foremost, understand the context of the ranch or the dairy operation and act accordingly, right? You know the ranch, you know your land, let's operate within those bounds. Second, critical one, avoid conversion of grassland. Keep ranchers ranching is what's best for those grasslands in the long haul for sure. The idea, we want to maximize vegetation cover, the diversity and the production within realistic bounds, which then, as John was talking about, right, critically reduces the need for supplemental feed in the long run. And then if you can minimize bare ground and overgrazing effects, that's ideal. All of those things lead to the maintenance of soil health, increased soil organic carbon, and the minimization of greenhouse gas emissions, which we're not talking about tonight, but by extension, right, gets into the carbon credits, gets into tracking those, makes the operation more profitable in the long run. And if you can integrate livestock on cropland that you have, then that's great. That's another little bonus. So we focus on the idea of implementing established practices, grazing management, range and pasture planting, compost and manure management. And with these principles, they lead to sustainable systems and operations, right? If you put these on the landscape. Outcomes of these practices are measured by regrow's remote sensing layers and the biogeochemical models that we run that tell us more about the soils and give us those specific metrics. For tonight, I'm just going to focus on the remote sensing side, and we'll dive into a specific example of the data and what it might look like over in pasture. So the data itself, grassland and grazing land monitoring products that regrow provides are across CONUS and also across the Canada grasslands. And they're essentially vegetation cover you see there on the left. And that's percent cover of each one of those 5 classes within every 30-meter pixel. And most importantly here, we're talking about the grasses up top, the perennials and annuals. We also provide range and production, and that's pounds per acre at every 30-meter pixel across the entire landscape. Now, if we look on the right-hand side, you can basically see some of that data through time. The upper right graph is a percent cover through time for a specific pasture in Montana, right? And we can see the perennial grasses for every year there, that green line bouncing around, but staying nice and high, 50, 60, 70%. You see bare ground, that's that yellow line, which is quite high up until about 2010. And then likely some management action took place where you see that bump in perennial grass cover and that drop in bare ground. Possibly a planting took place or something, but some management action drove that into a bit of a better state. The bottom left, you can see production, which is pounds per acre for those grasses over a different pasture in the Great Plains. And you can basically see that trending over time, right? So this gives us that nice long-term perspective on any pasture paddock across CONUS that you can see through time. But some of the real power comes in the 16-day data that we produce. So for this data as well, the production data, every 16 days, we calculate the pounds per acre for every one of those 30-meter pixels. And I keep saying 30-meter pixels. You can think about that as about 4 measurements for every acre on the landscape. And that really gets at what John was mentioning, is that pasture level variability. You have part of that pasture where the animals just aren't getting there because it's too far from the water. Well, at this level of detail, you can see that there's more forage in that part of the pasture and less down by the water at this level of measurement. And we can monitor, we see this every 16 days. And we can also go back to 1999 to the present. So we literally have every 16-day period from 1999 to present so that you can compare them through time and see what pastures look like. So if you look at these 2 graphs here, basically 2021, you can see at this single location was a pretty good year. peaked out at about 350 pounds per acre in the middle of the summer there, which was great. But as we know, 2022 has not been the same. It's about half of what it was last year in terms of that peak production time period. So let's dive into a specific example and sort of see how we might use that. So I just grabbed a 300-acre pasture in the West Canyons of Nebraska and just kind of had a look at it through time. And so what you see down below are those dotted lines are sort of those long-term 20-year averages, what we can, the knowledge that we can gain through the 20 years. That red dashed line going through the middle, that's our normal, that's average year. The green up top, that's our super productive year. 150% of normal is what that growing season is going to look like. And you can see this is across a single year from January to December with the pounds per acre there on the y-axis. The red line down below, that's what we don't want, right? That's the 50% of the long-term average. That's severe drought conditions. That's when we're in trouble. 2022, as we expect, that's been sitting on that 75% of normal average. It's been low the entire time. And what you can think about is this in terms of decision-making context. Since we're getting this every 16 days, this black line is slowly extending as you're checking the production on the platform. And you'll be able to see, say in May, that you're tracking that 75%, and you might thinking, okay, it's looking like one of those low years. What do I have plans right now for supplemental feed? How many am I running on each pasture right now to know whether it looked like it was last year before? You can start making decisions in this window of time with this information in every pasture. And because we have the historical record, you can then bring in past years, like a year that you knew was a great year, and say, well, I knew that one year was solid. What does it look like in comparison? Well, 2009 was a great year on this pasture. You can see that by mid-May, there's quite the difference. So if you were looking at this black line in mid-May, you could say, okay, I'm not gonna have a year like 2009 unless something drastically changes. And then you can also look at one of the worst drought years, 2002, and say, look, again, looking at sort of this window of time in May and saying, oh man, I'm sort of on track as I was in that drought year. I better truly think about what drought mitigation strategies I have in place right now, because unless things drastically turn around, I might be in trouble. So not only can these give you information during sort of critical windows, but you can look at these through time and say, okay, for this pasture, say in 2023, even if it seems like I'm having a bumper year, I might hold off putting them out to this summer pasture in 2023 because I know that 2022 wasn't quite what it would be normally. And look at 2 or 3 years down the line, because drought impacts can be sort of really significant, right, if you start building year upon year. So really looking at this data in detail over all of the past years of your operation, you can really start making some informed decisions. And with that, I will pass it off to Jimmy, and we can do questions and some comments later.
All right, Jimmy, it's headed your way.
Got it. Okay, can everybody see that?
Looks good.
Okay. Well, as you guys heard in the bio, my name's Jimmy Chapman, and I'm the founder and president of RanchSense. And our mission statement at RanchSense is to use technology to help ranchers and landowners more effectively steward their land. And that's a big blanket statement, but it's purposely large because there's a lot of technologies out there that we look at that apply to different things. So kind of the genesis of this company came out of the fact that I live in San Antonio, and I have a place a couple hours west of here. And I was spending a lot of time and resources driving back and forth to our ranch to check water and gates and feed and things like that. And then in addition, you know, I've worked on a lot of ranches growing up, and I actually ran a couple of places for a while. And we started putting together kind of a list of things that we thought maybe we could use technology to address. And, you know, even up to the point of eventually maybe automating some of those systems, but we're not quite there yet. So We spent the last 2 years really developing some solutions to monitor things like water levels, feed levels in feed bins and wildlife feeders, gates for open and closed. And while we see and continue to see a lot of value in all those applications, the one application that we got to first was the satellite water monitoring solution. When I say we got to first, we got it to a product first and ready to go. So, we spent a lot of time looking at different technologies to use to solve this issue. So we looked at different communication protocols, cellular, some of the other kind of purpose-built IoT network technologies that would have forced us to have to build networks, which is not something that we were looking to do. I've had experience doing that in oil and gas, and if it didn't work there, I didn't think it was going to work here. So everything kept pushing us back to satellite, which ultimately worked great because it takes off all the geographic constraints of where we can operate. And in addition, satellite technology has been coming down in price over the years, and it's to the point now where it fits into most ranching operation budgets. So we also looked at a lot of the different sensing technologies, radar, sonar, that we were going to use to actually measure water levels or feed levels. And what we came out with was a pressure transducer that we could drop to the bottom of the tank that would measure that water, and that seems to be the most reliable, the most accurate, and the most energy efficient, because all of our solutions are 100% solar powered as well. So truly took all the geographical constraints off where we can work. So we can put these things basically anywhere at this point. So at the same time, we were working on our software platform, and initially this platform was all spec'd out for me, because the initial system that we built was for my place. And but as we started getting a customer base, we circulated this obviously to our customers, and we integrated a lot of the feedback that we got from them, from some of the initial ranchers that were using the technology. And that's what got us to where we are now. Basically, the software platform we have is really designed to be user friendly. There's a lot of data that we have in the system, but we don't necessarily display a lot of data because, for our particular application, you don't necessarily need or want to see a lot of data. You just want to know, do you have water? Is the tank filling, or is the tank draining? And are the batteries charged on the system so that we're going to continue to get readings? So we've gotten a lot of feedback that our software application is really to the point, and that's appreciated by a lot of our customers. So ultimately, kind of the next step that so John and I both talked about so far is that we are in the final stages of getting a production ready integration into AgriWeb, which will allow our common customers to see all of our data that we're gathering on the AgriWeb platform as well. So kind of the approach that we take when we show up on these ranches is that, we view each ranch, while there's a lot of common issues that ranchers deal with on a daily basis, every ranch is different, and there are different issues and issues that are dealt with in different ways on every property. And so the way that we approach these ranches when we show up is we kind of say that we're very hands-off. And when we say hands-off, basically what that means is we don't walk in and say, look, you're going to save $3.21 a day by using this device in a combination of saved fuel, reduce wear and tear on your vehicles, reduce manpower, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now, because while a lot of that may be true, there's so many nuances on every ranch that it seems a little pretentious for us to walk in there and think that we can tell you down to the penny what your ranch, can get out of the system. So we're not above making suggestions, and we do that when they're asked for. We also have a lot of use cases that we can provide to ranchers that want to know how other people have used the system in the past. And then the fun part for us is when we get to come back, after a few weeks or a couple of months, and we have satisfied customers that want to tell us stories about how they have used this technology to solve issues that they were dealing with. We've had a couple of different ranches say that they were able to find leaks that have been dogging them for years by using our technology. I've never really figured out exactly how they did that, but they were pretty adamant that happened. So that was really good. A lot of people find reallocation of manpower to be one of the bigger the bigger things that they get out of the system. That, instead of checking water 7 days a week, well, now you can split that guy's time, and he can go weld on that set of pins that you've been trying to finish for 2 years, or he can get on the grader and grade the roads. There's a number of different things. And then the one that we always kind of thought would be important, but it came to the surface pretty quick, is the wildlife managers on a lot of these ranches, they love the system. And the reason why, obviously, wildlife is going to need water, but when you're ranching, priority is to make sure that your cattle have water, right? So you're always focused on the pasture where the cattle are, or the pasture where the cattle are going. Well, by being able to passively monitor water in a pasture where the cattle have been, you can still make sure you have water back there, and that helps to attract and maintain wildlife populations in areas that may in the past have suffered from inconsistent water levels. And during a drought, especially on in the more arid areas, wildlife leaves really quick when you run out of water. And with the money that a lot of ranchers get off of their hunting programs, it's a pretty valuable asset. So, the way that we work, though, is we never really bill our product as a replacement for the guy that's going to be out there checking water. There's always going to be the need for people to actually put eyes on an asset from time to time, because you're not always just checking water. You're looking at livestock, you're checking fences, you're making sure gates are closed. But the way we look at it is RanchSense is out there as a tool to help those guys and gals more efficiently do their job every day. So with that, I'll hand it back off.
All right. Yeah, if everybody wants to bring their screens back up, we can do a little Q&A. That was really enlightening, and I think helped build out the depth of understanding that I have for sure on each of your resources, your tools, and how they might integrate. I guess a question that came up to me, to mind there is, you were talking about use cases, Jimmy. I can think of quite a few, but one of the things we've been dealing a lot with, and we handle, every subject in our producer education team, basically, that you can think of. But one huge one is bringing the next generation back to the ranch, that intergenerational transfer piece. And, just riding around checking water doesn't sound that attractive. But I think looking at some of these technologies and integrating technology into the ranching enterprise does sound more attractive. So I don't know if y'all have encountered that, how that's gone, if you've seen some of the kind of next generation be willing to pick this up and run with it as something that they can add, back to an operation to improve the operation. How are they making that pitch and that sales pitch maybe to the owner generation that's struggling to let go? Maybe talk through a little bit of that if you've had experience with it.
Sure. I mean, that is one of the first things that we see is when you have the younger generation coming back to the ranch, they're very comfortable with this, extremely. In fact, they're really uncomfortable when they can't find this. So they're, you know, it makes a lot of sense for them to roll over first thing in the morning, and before they even pour their cup of coffee, they can pull up their water levels and help plan the day. You know, one of the first early adopter ranches that we had out in the West Texas mountains, you know, this is kind of two use cases wrapped into one. The manager told me after about 3 weeks, he said the first thing that he does every single morning is when he's making his coffee, he looks at his phone, and that's how he plans out the day. Because we have a really simple user interface where we have color-coded push pins on a map that tells you within 25% how much water you have in each tank, and he can immediately see where he needs to go or send somebody. And he also was the use case that told me, he said, Jimmy, we have probably the best motor grader driver in the whole county works on our ranch, and our roads are crap because he spends all of his time checking water. Well, 2 months later, I went back out to that ranch and their roads were great because that guy was splitting his time between driving that motor grader and checking water now. So that was a reallocation of manpower to a much higher value task.
And I'll jump in there, and you know, it's really clear. We see it every day that the next generation is grabbing this, is looking for tools, is wanting to adopt that because they've either, you know, learned about it or had other experiences or other careers and come back and wanting to digitize and move their business forward. But an important aspect is actually that older generation. The average age of the rancher is still the late 50s, right? We're seeing a lot of ranchers actually wanting to digitize and get all that IP, get all of those records and that data out of their head into a solution, a platform such as AgRib, so that the next generation has all of that history, right? So that they can then be successful and move forward. So we're seeing it come from both angles. And you made the point there around how we're convincing the older generation. That's a big driver. You know, don't you want your generation, the next generation, to be successful, and don't you want to hand over all of that knowledge you have? Now you can. Now you can have it, and they can go and make faster, better decisions, and you know, take on that business and that land in a better shape than what they got it.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to throw the older generation under the bus at all. They've actually been very, very adoptive of this technology as well. So.
Yeah, I was just going to put out the real small advantages sometimes are at the younger generation. They want to do something a little different. They want to do something that feels not quite exactly what dad did or what mom did, but yet still be a rancher. And so this sort of just provides that little bit of opportunity. They bring this added extra value because they understand these systems more. They've just grown up with it in their hands. It's just kind of this nice added layer to the next generation to bring to the ranch this sort of savvy, this tech savvy that they can apply. It's nice to see.
Yeah, and the barriers are not high, right? The barriers are not high to get on with this. Right. And you know, the costs and the change management is not a barrier. So you know, groups like us are prepared, and we do it every single day. You know, moving people through the next part of their transition.
Yeah, Jimmy, you also mentioned, you know, your own ranch and you not living on the ranch, and I think that also, you know, along the same lines, you start thinking about folks that want to get started, and you look at the cost of land, leasing, cattle themselves, et cetera. And so, you know, for folks that aren't inheriting or being brought into a multi-generational operation, you know, this may help them manage an operation that they can't get to in the daylight, or maybe not every day, but they can monitor remotely a lot of these key areas and help them make wise decisions, even though they may not be quite as close to the ground every day. So I can see another great use case there for keeping folks interested that may not have all the capital necessary to go full time right at the start.
That's a good point, and we have a good mix of professional ranchers that, I mean, they're making their living, but we also especially down here in Texas, it's a big thing. When you make your money, you go buy a place in the hill country. Well, you can either pay somebody to look after it, or you can come up with another solution. And a lot of those guys are turning to remote monitoring, and we're fielding a lot of inbound interest from them.
One thing I would add on that is we're seeing from all sizes of customers that have blocks, right, at great distance, and knowing how many animals they have and the pasture availability, right? So they're not having to drive hundreds of miles sometimes to look at the animals and look at their pasture availability. They can do that on their mobile phone now, right? So think of the efficiencies and the confidence and decisions that now can be made, particularly when we have this remoteness. So of all sizes, not just the smaller guys, but the larger guys that have, you know, ranches or blocks a great distance away.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was on a place yesterday that most of their ground's 8 to 10 mile radius, but in the summer they lease a large summer place that's 70 miles away. So it gets to be a lot of time, a lot of wind chill time if you got to check on those cattle every day. And with some high value cattle, they, you know, that makes a lot of sense. So we got a question that came in that's just bringing up soil moisture, and if any of your applications can help address soil moisture, either somewhat historically and also real time. You know, what are the capabilities with that, or is there another technology you're aware of that might be integrated, John, into your system that helps with moisture evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a good one for Matt as well, but I mean, we have a number of integrations, and we are looking at you know, soil moisture and those types of things to come into AgRep to help continue to round that out. And Matt, you might, you know, have a good handle on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can add in that. So what we do, I didn't talk about tonight, was that we couple that remote sensing data, that observational data, with a soil biogeochemical model, which basically just means it models a lot of the processes that are happening in the soil. And, you know, bringing in weather data, climate data, knowing what type of soil is there, being able to determine what the vegetation is doing, then we can get estimates of that soil moisture content through time with the model. And essentially in the same way of that every 16 days, or even a finer resolution you can run with the model, is get it what would be a soil moisture value. You might not be getting these exact numbers right, but you're getting these relative levels through time through this modeling to give you good insight to that. And there are products out there from sort of a remote sensing standpoint, but they're generally quite coarse, where, like, you know, you're not getting too much specific data, like say at a pasture scale, but it is useful data that's out there that I'd say go explore it. There's a lot of free data out there if you want to search around.
And John, I've seen some ranchers using AgriWeb, and I guess maybe just describe a little more about the functionality, for instance, of, you know, calculating grazing days. How much of the information is sort of garbage in, garbage out that the rancher, you know, enters versus that could be loaded in through these other applications or other services? Or is there a sort of a menu of options that a rancher could choose that sort of puts that on a bit of a scale on what they want to do manually versus feeding the data in from other sources?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a combination, right? So the user can, depending on the tools and the level they're at, they can enter the data manually, right? Whether it be entering weights of animals, they can do that directly in the app, or with an integration into a panel reader or a set of scales, or, you know, a piece of hardware where we're integrating through Bluetooth that data to come in directly, right? Same on the pasture side, where they can go in and enter that forage availability of pounds per acre manually if they're doing a pasture reading, or we can pull that data in directly from Regrow through that integration. So we have the capability to do both to meet the rancher where they're at. And in terms of the functionality, the beauty of it is the rancher does not need to sit back and do a whole bunch of calculations, right? It's in the palm of a hand, showing the forage availability, the stocking rate, right, based on, you know, how many animals and the stocking load. That then turns into how many days that those animals can be in that paddock or in that pasture, and then, you know, they can assess visually across that whole map, the whole ranch map, basically, you know, low density, high density stocking rates. So they can look back historically and forward and plan out that grazing.
Yeah, it's neat to see it in use, and I've seen some very experienced ranchers who have found a lot of value in it. So it's cool to see when these technologies are working, and you know, with all the negative we want to cast at some of the technologies like social media and other things, it's nice to have some positive examples of how these smartphones can actually help us, and appreciate what you guys are bringing to the table here for the current and next generation of ranchers. So any parting comments? I know we're past the top of the hour. We've still got a great crowd that's hung on, but I've answered, I think, the few questions that have come through here, and I've had a few of my own, but feel free to leave us with any parting comments, and then we'll sign off for the night.
I mean, my final comment is honestly the biggest risk in all of this is to do nothing, right? I mean, there are very powerful solutions. We've talked through 3 tonight, right? But to do nothing and to think that we're going to continue into the future and be successful by what we've done in the past is not going to work, right? We've got too many challenges facing us. Drought just happens to be one of them, and so we need to act now. Solutions are available. They're very powerful. They're readily accessible. There's a clear return on investment. So that's my parting words. And from an agri perspective, you know, if you're interested in taking that next step, just head to www.agriweb.com, AGRIWEBB, and then, you know, we can help move your business forward.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with John. Don't let my closing comment is don't let the cost scare you off, because it can look expensive up front, but the cost of doing nothing long term is almost always more expensive. Specifically to my technology, ours costs $5 a diesel a month is what it costs to run one of our sensors, and I can promise you're going to burn more than $5 worth of diesel going out to check that. So if you're interested in RanchSense, we're at ranchsense.com, or shoot me an email at info@ranchsense.com, and be happy to give you a call or come see you and show you what we got. We're doing demo units through the end of the year, so it's a good chance to test drive the system.
Yeah, I'll just put another second what they've been saying. The data, tools, and tech that are across that slide, I mean, that's the key there. It's all becoming readily available. It's been collected for 20, 30 years now, so let's capitalize on all of that data and the tools that are bringing it to the forefront to make it super easy to use, super easy to implement on your ranch. And like John was saying, I mean, you know, it certainly doesn't hurt to test it out. It certainly doesn't hurt to give it a test drive and see if it's going to be better. And I can almost guarantee you it is. It's going to help you. It's going to give you peace of mind in some of the decisions that are tough to make, knowing that you have the support of some information behind you that you can act on. And so I would just say, yeah, we're facing tough times with the drought, but we can look at the history, we can look at what we've done in the past, and we can make great decisions about the future with all of this information.
Well, thanks again, all of you gentlemen, John, Jimmy, and Matt. We've had a lot of requests for deeper dives on some of these technologies because, as some of you mentioned, you've been more geographically present and out there talking to ranchers in some areas than others. So it's really good to put this out on a national scale, put this recording up where people can access it. For our viewers, thanks again for attending, and hope to see you on November the 1st when we do our virtual stockmanship and stewardship all day on the 1st. Feel free to jump in there. It's free, and we've got another great lineup of speakers from A to Z, so including some more grazing management content. Thanks again, everyone. It's been great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.